There is a man in the Bible who woke up one morning with a plan to make a decision. Not a bad man, not someone running from God, just someone who had decided that today wasn't quite the right day. He needed better conditions. He wanted to feel ready. He wanted a little more time. That morning was his last one. And here is the thing that should stop you cold. He didn't know it was his last one. Neither did the people outside Noah's Ark on the day the door closed. They had spent 120 years assuming that if the moment ever became truly urgent, they'd feel it. They'd recognize it. They'd know. They didn't. That feeling, the quiet certainty that the important decisions can wait, isn't weakness. It's the default state of the human heart. We don't avoid the decision because we reject it. We avoid it because we genuinely believe that tomorrow is always available. But what if the most dangerous theological lie you carry right now isn't something dramatic? What if it isn't some grand heresy or obvious rebellion? What if it's just a small, invisible assumption buried so deep you've never even named it? The assumption that grace has no expiration date, at least not one that applies to you. In the next few minutes, we're going to walk through something that most prophetic voices rarely address directly. Not the closing of the window of grace at the end of history. That's coming. But there's another closing, quieter, closer, and far more personal that Scripture speaks about with a precision we tend to skip over. And when you finally see it, you won't be able to unsee it. 2 Corinthians 6:2. 4 words that should have stopped history in its tracks. Now is the acceptable time. The Greek word translated as now, none, doesn't carry the flexibility we'd like it to have. It doesn't mean soon. It doesn't mean when conditions align. It means this moment, this breath, this exact space of time where you are alive and hearing this. Paul wasn't writing to people in theological crisis. He was writing to people who already understood the gospel intellectually. People who believed, who planned to act on it, who fully intended to respond later. And his words cut through every layer of reasonable delay with surgical precision. Now. Not because tomorrow is impossible, but because you don't own tomorrow. Here is where it gets deeply uncomfortable and deeply important. Researchers who study human decision-making call it temporal discounting. The brain systematically undervalues consequences that feel far away, and the deeper and more permanent a consequence is, the more aggressively the brain pushes it into a distance that feels manageable. Eternal things, the most permanent consequences imaginable, get treated like dental appointments. We know they matter, we just never schedule them. And this is exactly what Hebrews warns about with a directness that still feels startling. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your heart. Notice what hardens the heart in that verse. Not active rebellion, not dramatic sin. Today becoming tomorrow, that's it. The heart doesn't harden from one catastrophic decision to walk away from God. It hardens from 10,000 small ones, from 10,000 mornings where the decision got quietly rescheduled. Until one day, the sense of spiritual urgency that once felt pressing has dimmed so completely that you assume everything must be fine. The silence feels like peace, but it isn't. Go back to Genesis 7. After Noah's family entered the ark, the Bible records something most people read right past. God shut the door. Not Noah, God. But here is the part that changes everything. The door was open for 120 years before that. 120 years of invitation. 120 years where any person who had ever heard Noah speak could have walked through. The judgment didn't fall because God closed the door too early. It fell because an entire civilization spent 120 years deciding that today wasn't the right day. The door was open. Grace was available. They had today, and tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. And then they didn't. That story isn't just ancient history. It's a mirror held up to the present moment. Now there are 3 forces that silently, invisibly occupy the space between you and the decision you know you need to make. You need to know them by name. The first is comfort, not suffering, comfort. When life is manageable, when things are working well enough, the felt need for God quietly fades. We seek Him most desperately when we are broken, and we delay Him most confidently when we are not. The enemy of your soul does not always come in the form of catastrophe. Sometimes he comes in the form of a life that is just comfortable enough to keep you from acting. The second is familiarity with the call. You have heard this before. You have felt this pull before. And every time you did not respond, something subtle happened. The pull became slightly easier to ignore. Not because God's voice grew weaker, but because you grew more accustomed to resisting it. Every time the heart says, "not yet," the word "yet" gets a little quieter. The third force is perhaps the most insidious, the illusion of the future self. Somewhere in the architecture of the human mind, there exists a version of you that is more prepared than you are today, more spiritually ready, more emotionally stable, more willing to surrender. You're waiting for that person to arrive. But that person is a fiction. There is no future version of you that becomes ready through waiting. There is only you, in this moment, choosing to respond or choosing to reschedule again. Luke 12, a man addressed directly by God, not through a dream, not through a prophet. God speaks to him. And God calls him a fool. Not for his sins, not for his failures, but for one single sentence: "Soul, take your ease." He looked at his life, the abundance, the plans, the future he had carefully constructed, and decided the moment called for rest rather than response. This very night your soul is required of you. Everything he had built on the assumption of tomorrow became irrelevant in a single breath. Jesus told that parable not to frighten. He told it to clarify the greatest spiritual danger of ordinary life, not the dramatic fall, but the quiet drift, not the open rejection, but the perpetual rescheduling. Here is the truth that the entire biblical witness converges on, from the earliest chapters of Genesis to the final pages of Revelation. God does not force the door. He stands at it and knocks. Revelation 3:20. He calls Isaiah 55:6. He draws John 6:44. He sets before you what Revelation 3:8 describes as an open door that no one can shut. No one. Not circumstances, not your past, not your failures, not the enemy, not time. The only thing capable of keeping you from walking through that door is you choosing to remain outside. And here is what most people misunderstand about the decision itself. It is not a feeling you wait for. It is not an emotional state you need to achieve. Salvation is not the moment when everything finally feels right. It is a turning of the will before the feelings catch up. It is choosing to stop walking away. It is the decision to face the door and step through, even while part of you still feels unprepared. Because that part will always feel unprepared. That's not a sign to wait. That's a sign to decide anyway. The people who describe their moment of surrender rarely describe something cinematic. Most of them describe something quiet, something almost ordinary, a moment of finally saying yes to something that had been waiting patiently for a long, long time. And what changes isn't circumstances. What changes is the direction of the heart. Something begins in that moment that no future delay can initiate. Not because God becomes more available. He was already available, but because you become available to Him. What you have right now, in this breath, in this moment, is the same thing 120 years of people outside Noah's Ark had, and spent a lifetime choosing not to use. It is the same thing the man in Luke 12 woke up with that morning, and assumed he would have again the following day. It is the single most valuable possession any human being carries, and unlike wealth, unlike health, unlike anything else, it cannot be stored. It cannot be saved for later. It can only be used now. If something is moving in you as you hear this, do not explain it away. Do not schedule it. Do not tell it to return when you are more prepared. That movement is not random, And the door that stands open before you today is the same one that someone died to open. The window of grace is not closing because of world events. It is not closing because of prophetic timelines. It may be closing because you will not always be here. And unlike tomorrow, this moment is guaranteed.